Hi, I'm Stephanie Wallace, and this is Independence Radio. My guests today are Dr. Mitch Tepper and Dr. Danielle Sheypuk, both experts in the sexuality of people with spinal cord injuries and other physical disabilities. Today, we're going to talk about sex, dating, and disability. Enjoy the conversation. I'd just like to start off asking, first of all, what do we call you? Do we call you a sexpert, a sexologist, what?
Well, I like to say first and foremost, I'm a psychologist.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So
okay.
That's no apologies. That's my training, and that's how it all began at the New School where I got my PhD, and from there I just kind of evolved and developed certain areas that I like to work in and feel like I have a lot of experience in now. So, but in the media, I've been called a sexpert a lot, and I don't fight it.
Okay. And Dr. Tepper, you?
I actually am a sexologist, which means I have a PhD in human sexuality education. So I have a educational foundation and a research foundation, and I'm also ASECT, which is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, certified as an educator and a sexuality counselor. So those are the roles and credentials I have, and I actually work as a sex coach, using more of an educational coaching model than a counseling model.
Okay, before I'm going to backtrack a little bit, and could you tell me the nature of your disabilities first, Dr. Tepper?
Sure. I have a spinal cord injury, C6, C7, incomplete, going on about 35 years now.
Oh, wow. And you, Dr. Sheypuk?
I was born with my disability. It's called spinal muscular atrophy, type 2 I have. So it's congenital, and I was diagnosed when maybe around the age of 3, and I had my first motorized wheelchair in kindergarten.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. And how does how does your disability affect your sexuality?
That's an excellent question. That's the question of all questions. So, and I feel like that's a question that still remains largely unaddressed, because we talk about different areas of disability, but when it comes to sex and dating, there's not a lot of conversation out there. And that's sad, because my disability profoundly affects my dating life and my sexuality. And not in terms of my, how do I want to put it? It's kind of like cyclical, like a circle. So I grew up with family and friends not really talking about dating and sexuality. The covert message to me was, that's not for you. Like, no one's really gonna find you sexual because of your wheelchair. Or if someone does, it's gonna take someone really, really special. So that's disheartening and disappointing and depressing, frankly. So that, coupled with our reflection in the media, where I never saw myself in any magazines or on any television shows. And, you know, all through high school and college, I was reading Vogue and InStyle and Glamour and thinking in my head, well, I like to dress my body too, and I like to wear makeup, and I feel sexual. I have crushes. I want to date boys. So why not me? Why am I exempt?
I'm going to put a pin in that for a minute, and I'm going to ask Dr. Tepper. You said 35 years ago you had an accident. So that must have affected you when you were very young, like right in the prime.
Yes, I was 20 years old and working as a lifeguard at the time when I dove into the water and sustained my injuries.
And so how did that affect you? I imagine a young man, 20 years old, probably in the prime of his sexuality, confident. How did that affect you? Did it set you back?
Of course. I'm 55 now, so I would say I'm in my prime now.
Oh, okay.
So, just to correct you. But yeah, I was at 20. You're really just developing your sexuality, and while Danielle was reading Vogue and the other magazines, I was weaned on Playboy and other types of adult men's magazines from a very early age. You know, it was kind of regular, magazines around my grandparents' house, uncle's house, whatever. And so I was a very sexual person, as in very interested in sexuality. I didn't have a lot of sexual experience as far as, nowadays everyone thinks of sex as intercourse. But I had very limited, only one experience with one, girlfriend before my injury. I was sexually active in other ways, and this was, in the late 70s, 80s. So, I was into other types of sex and expression. So when I was injured, the first question I asked, which is the first question a lot of people who get injured who don't have children yet, is, will I ever be able to have children? And I was in the ICU. I was, they just took my, not the ventilator, but whatever was helping me breathe out. And so it was the first question I could ask. I was still in traction, with weights off my head and in a striker frame. I'm sure some of the people know what a striker frame is. And I asked my doctor, will I ever be able to have children? And he says, and this was, 1982, and he says, chances are less than 10% you'll ever be able to have a child. And that's all he said. He didn't say, but don't worry, you can adopt, or don't worry, you'll still be able to meet a partner. That was it, quick answer. And that was it for the first few months in rehab. So I was curious from the beginning. I didn't understand, for me, with a spinal cord injury, some men still get erections. We call them reflex erections. And I couldn't understand, why I had one all the time, because I had this indwelling catheter, something to empty my bladder, which was stimulating me. And I didn't know if it still worked. I couldn't quite feel it, and I just sensed it. And it was embarrassing because, one of the nurses said, your flagpole is up, and I wasn't really interested in hearing that from her. And so, I couldn't really use my arms or my hands well to stimulate. I tried to get a private duty nurse to help me, but she was a little concerned about that. We were getting along well, but she wasn't willing to kind of breach that boundary. So I was left on my own to figure things out, and that I did. I probably took it to a different level that I ended up with a PhD in human sexuality.
What and is your own situation what got you interested in this field, this line of work?
Absolutely. I was working on a degree, and I graduated in a degree because it was in my junior year of college. So I've got a degree in business administration with a focus on finance, and went out and worked in banking for a short time. But then I gravitated over to public health, and after getting a master's in public health and doing a national survey of the first 500 people who were tagged as spinal cord injured at the National Spinal Cord Injury Association at the time, now United Spinal, on sex education and counseling, and only 50% of the people, and I had nearly a 70% response rate, received any kind of sexuality education or counseling, which, all the people were affected in profound ways sexually. And then for the 50% who got something, the half of those said it didn't meet their needs. So that's what I did as a master's thesis, and that inspired me. People's responses, not only to answering the multiple choice, true, false, quantitative questions, but they wrote in qualitative answers, and they sent me cards, and they had a lot of questions, and I said, this is what I should be doing. I was heading towards managing. I wanted to be the president or CEO of a rehab hospital when I went to Yale for my degree in public health and hospital administration, but that study and the response to it motivated me, saying this is what I should be doing. This is my special purpose. And so that I went on to get a PhD at the University of Pennsylvania.
What about you, Dr. Sheypuk? What led you to this line of work?
There's been several different steps that led me to where I am right now, and that's the first one I talked about a little bit, and that's the discrepancy that I was always aware of as I was growing up, especially in adolescence and in college. And then when I came to New York to go to grad school, the discrepancy became even more delineated, I guess, because that was the first time I really started dating, and I put my profile up on Match.com. And I noticed how friends who were, quote, of equal caliber, were without a visible disability, were getting much more dates. And at that time, I was heavily into Sex and the City, and I thought, I thought, where's my Carrie Bradshaw to ask about this? Like, where do I go to ask about dating and this topic? That motivated me to start writing on the issue. And I wanted to infuse pop culture, again, inspired by the TV show. So I wanted to talk about the real message, bring my PhD into play, and also infuse it with pop culture. That's when my friend called me one night and said, I found something on the internet for you. It's perfect. So it was the Miss Wheelchair New York pageant, and it mentioned academic achievement and glamorousness. And that was actually the first time I heard glamour paired with disability, the two words. So I thought, let me go in, let me enter as a contestant, let me win it, and then let me use that to open the door to start talking very publicly about the issue. Because our society responds well to pop culture. Yeah. So that's what I did, and I hired a publicist to help me, and I used it as leverage so people could really hear the message. Not only that people with disabilities are sexual, but that we're also sexy and glamorous and cool. Because up until now, I've seen some change, but it's still not cool to have a disability, and I don't see why it can't be. And then finally, after I graduated, I wanted to open my own therapy practice, and I thought that I would open it over Skype to make it easier for people with disabilities to come to therapy. So the intent was to address issues of dating and sexuality that they may encounter, but also to address, I call it dateable self-esteem. So I like to differentiate it between just the general concept of self-esteem, because people with disabilities are often happy with a lot of aspects of their life, but when it comes to dating, our self-esteem is really in the gutter.
One of the things that I find, I became disabled in 2009, and I found, one, your medical needs are taken care of. You get the things that you need, but that part of your life, there was nowhere I find that there was nowhere for me to turn. There was nowhere, yes. No one for me to talk. Who do I talk to about this big change in my life? Mm-hmm. Or is it just over? For a while I felt like it's just over. And it's such an important thing to deal with in terms of self-esteem, because sometimes we run into situations where we accept less than we deserve because we feel lucky to have someone who may just be curious, not necessarily interested. And so we accept a lot less sometimes because of that self-esteem. You may still be pretty or beautiful or whatever it is. You're a beautiful woman. But it's something about this wheelchair or the crutches or whatever it is that makes the world look at us like patients.
Because unfortunately, the stigmas and stereotypes are still so powerful. I mean, I bet if we went out there and asked a group, out there in downtown Brooklyn, and asked a group of able-bodied men what some of their opinions were, we would still be thought of as, the word asexual would probably still come up, or wondering if we're able to have sex. And those are big time players when it comes to finding a mate. For some reason, those are big time players which I argue that there are many other factors that come into play. And also, there's many ways to have sex, as Dr. Tepper will agree, and ways to look at it.
Now, you both mentioned the other ways to have sex. How do you get that message across to someone who has a disability and, certain parts of their bodies are not, usable the way they used to be? I don't know, did I say that right? That sounds so crude. But you understand what I'm saying. Who have to find alternative ways. How do you get that message across? Because I don't think people, once I can't do it the way that I'm used to seeing it being done, it can't be done. Mm-hmm. How do you get that message across?
So, I want to back up to your initial question. Is where do I go? Who do I ask? I wonder where you did your rehabilitation, because I would hope, but maybe it's not true, because my study was in 1990, where less than half of people got anything and half didn't meet their needs. And we're, 25 plus years, and it sounds like things haven't gotten any better, because I've been advocating providing comprehensive sexual health care and rehabilitation for all that time. I developed a curriculum back in the early 90s and have trained hundreds and hundreds of health professionals, but still, the trickle down from health professional to patient doesn't seem to be working. So if you can't go to your doctor or someone on your rehab team, I know I just last year, an updated brochure for United Spinal. I've done webinars for them, so I'd encourage people to go to the Sexuality area of the resources on United Spinal. They could watch a recent webinar in February by someone else on sex toys, and they could watch one on me on regaining that feeling. So that initial experience, because my research was on men and women with spinal cord injuries, and it was around pleasure and orgasm, and I asked everybody, whether they had orgasm or not, to tell me about their sexuality after their injury, and they said it's not the same, it's not normal. So that is kind of somewhat universal, even beyond spinal cord injury. I work with a lot of injured vets, so it's after you step on the landmine, after you get burned, it's not the same, it's not normal. And then often people's first experiences with masturbation, and that is very disappointing, even if you have absolutely no sensation or no feeling, right? So that's a huge loss, and then they come to the conclusion it's pointless, why bother? Or if they have sensation and it doesn't escalate for arousal, where they don't experience orgasm or ejaculation, they say it's pointless, why bother? And people get stuck there if they don't have help, and often their lived experience, their experience after masturbation, sometimes with a partner who avoided having sex with them, who cheated on them, and it wasn't a good experience. And so leaving people once again thinking their sex life is over. I really believe a lot, why I mentioned United Spinal, in reaching out to other people with injuries or disabilities for support. There is a lot out there on the internet now. On my site at drmitchelltepper.com, I have 6 videos called Sex and Paralysis video series. So it demonstrates sexual positions for men and women. Granted, the woman is paraplegic, so she has use of her upper body, and there's been a call for people with higher level injuries to be represented, and I'm glad to do that if I have somebody to model. And so we have one for men and one for women, and we have also other things to go towards expanding your relearning, how to experience pleasure. And so I have something on Tantra, which is, a way of, I call it mindfulness and the yoga of sex. So it's taking mindfulness techniques. Mindfulness and Tantra come from the same source, and it's taking that and some of the techniques from you learn in yoga, and you can take adaptive yoga for breathing and centering your body, and putting them with an intention, a more sexual, erotic intention. Intention is very important, and attention. In order to this to work, and then the other one was on sensate focus on touch and learning to touch again. The combination of being mindful and exploring all areas that you do have sensation is important, but we have to work through those myths that it's pointless, why bother? So we need positive, education about what's really your potential. So I believe education is important, and I think role models are important, and then instruction, skill building.
Right. I came to a seminar. You did a seminar. Maybe it was not last year, the year before, 2015, I believe, and
Yeah.
we did that, the touch, and I was so impressed with that, and being in the moment, and that touch part though was really, I was very impressed with that, because it does give people another alternative to get your head out of what you're used to seeing, and because your life is different now.
Yeah.
Especially if you came into your disability, your life is different now, and so you really have to change your thinking.
On that note, and you mentioned when you were, after you sustained your disability, you mentioned self-esteem. I find that in my therapy practice, it's so complex. So sometimes it is about orgasm, and it's about getting an erection and masturbating, but all the issues around that, and dating, and that involve dating and sex, it's so deep. And they go from everything from privacy. Like, how do you go about being intimate with someone when you have a home attendant?
Right.
Or what if you have a family that hovers and doesn't give you time? And then
just even your special set of circumstances that you may have now that are not romantic to explain to somebody.
Right. And even take it back a notch. How do you even meet someone in the first place? My patients will come to me. So some have never had any dating experience. So I find a difference in my clients between congenital disabilities, being born with it, and sustaining a spinal cord injury, because someone with a congenital disability like myself, we've never even had the notion.
And nothing to compare it to.
Yes, we've never had the notion of ourselves as sexual. So then you're building dateable self-esteem from the very bottom up. And then it goes to things, there's a lot of questions around when to reveal your disability if you're online dating. Mm-hmm. Do you put it in your profile, or do you wait? Or what happens when it does become intimate and you wear depends.
Right? Yeah.
That's like,
that was my for a long time. Because I wondered, when do you disclose certain information? And I was doing an online dating thing, and I met a guy, and we talked, and then we hit it off wonderfully. And I was like, okay, so when do you say something? When do you? He knew I had a disability, but I think for some people that think, okay, she's in a wheelchair and she's just sitting down, she'll just get up and everything will be regular when it's time, And it's like, I was like, okay, listen, before I get in too deep, I'm just going to let him know everything. And I went down this laundry list of things and threw it at him, like, there, boom, can you deal with that? Can you handle that? And then it was like, nah.
That's such
I can't.
It's such a good point that you just said. I have to comment on it because it's so relevant. So my recommendation to my clients is to always put it up front in the profile that you have a disability. So either in the picture or in the narrative that you have a disability. But then the question here, or the gray ground, is, how much do you say? Do you say you need 24-hour care? Do you say you need help washing your hair? That you can't go to the bathroom without someone else's help? Do you need to say it all at once? And sometimes there's that pressure to say it all at once. And maybe you felt that pressure. Like, let me put it all out there. But I like to switch that focal spotlight onto who you're talking to as a date. This person also has issues, skeletons in their closet, things that are private and intimate that he doesn't have to disclose to you
all at one time, right?
Yeah. So I'm a big, when you're comfortable to talk about more of those intimate details.
Do you think that people with disabilities have problems meeting meeting people and dating, Do you think people look at us and think, I don't want to have to change any diapers, I don't want to have to do any of those type of things? Do you think they look at us like that?
Yeah,
You
I
know?
do. I think a part of the population does still hold tight to those stereotypes. And then another another subset of the population has just never been exposed to disability. And I blame that on the media as well.
Mhm.
If you don't see it on TV,
Right.
so they're not sure what to do or how to take someone in a wheelchair on a date. And also, society can be very superficial. It's often about, oh, look who I've got on my arm. Look at this
Right.
hot person that I picked up. So how can we be that quote unquote hot person when we're up against this mound of stereotypes that just aren't true?
One of the things that I found is that even amongst ourselves, we don't consider each other dateable sometimes. I do know some couples who are both disabled and they date, but I've been dealing with laid love and intimacy for the disabled for 2 years now. And I've had so many people come up to me and talk to me about, now you guys do it professionally, I do it like kitchen table, so it's like we get to talk and talk to each other and educate each other just by exchanging our experiences. And I've had people come up to me and tell me, I don't understand. I haven't dated in 15 years. I'm not bad looking. I keep myself together, and they still have not dated. And even in talking with each other, would you ever date somebody in a wheelchair? And talking to somebody in a wheelchair, hell no. It's like, are you serious? Why not? What am I going to do with a woman in a wheelchair? And so I think also the way we look at each other, it's like we haven't gotten over ourselves yet. How can we expect other people to get over do you understand what I'm saying? We haven't accepted ourselves.
Absolutely. There's a concept of internalized homophobia. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
No, I haven't.
Danielle? So people may be, not straight. They may be gay or lesbian, but still harbor, hatred towards other people and themselves because they grew up, I want to say in an able body, but they grew up in a really heteronormative world, and they grew up with all the, learning all the stigma. And so as people, come of age and they begin to identify their feelings as having feelings towards someone towards the same sex, it doesn't always change the attitudes that they learn. So there could be a level of homophobia even within somebody who is gay or lesbian. And I think the same thing happens to people with disabilities. So like when I first broke my neck, my mother is pushing me in the mall and saying, hey, there's someone in a wheelchair, go say hi. And I'm like, no way, I wouldn't go say hi to them before. And it wasn't because they were in a wheelchair, but I was just don't push me over there because I'm in a chair and you think I have something in common with them. I don't. So there's this, need to hold on to your identity and not to, redefine me like this. And so if I wouldn't have done it yesterday when I was walking, don't push me over there today. And so we learn these things just like everyone else. And Danielle's experience, is different. People who were born with their disabilities, learn this from day one. Linda Mona did work, Dr. Linda Mona, on sexual esteem, and it's similar to dating esteem, and we're talking about relating to people how they feel lovable and capable as a partner. And it's, sexual esteem scales don't measure that. But she saw that actually people born with their disabilities had a higher level of sexual esteem because people who acquired their disabilities were constantly comparing to before.
It's sort of like you feel kind of like it's broken now.
Yeah.
It doesn't work the way it used to work. So
well, I think that there's also a difference too between like having feeling, because a lot of my patients with congenital disabilities are really horny and masturbate and want to, they have it. There's like some intact, like their sexual function, is working. So there's also that difference and difficulty with us too. But I just wanted to piggyback off what you were saying and to address the question about dating someone else in a wheelchair and some people don't. I feel that ableism is still so powerful in our culture, and that's the concept of when you're growing up, especially with a disability, congenital, maybe specifically, it's like, you're in this able-bodied world, and often parents and the family push you, and maybe it's even covert pushing, but to just be as, quote, normal as possible. So you have a disability, but, work around it, minimize it. So often I see through the developmental spectrum people that know absolutely no one with a disability for a long time and don't even want to, let alone date them, because I spent so much time being normal, having normal friends, having normal boyfriend, doing normal things. Why would I want to now associate with the exact image that I'm trying to repress? Right. And that's sad. And that's something that is changing, and I hope will change more.
Definitely. Thank you for that, because when I was talking about internalized homophobia, it's the same for somebody who's grown up gay or lesbian or trans. So between ableism, it's more directly comparable to our experience, both yours and mine. Mm-hmm. To your point about people having sensation and such with different types of disabilities, the research shows too that, or just in the population born with their disabilities, although they feel very sexual, their first kiss is later and their first intercourse is later. So you have the experience of having full sensations. And I often talk when I'm teaching and when I'm working with people, I talk about systems that affect sexual response and expression. And I have to explain, especially to medical professionals, that sometimes a disability doesn't affect sexual function or response at all. People could have sensation, they could have sexual responses, they could have babies, right? But it's the sexual expression, it's the dating, it's the ability to speak. A lot of people I work with have problems with speaking, and so they have to use a communication board or an assistant. And it's sometimes accessibility, so I work with a lot of people with cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy, but, if they have a power chair, they don't get out, they can't get out, it's a whole logistical procedure to try to go out on a date. So these like barriers, which are barriers to, work too, are larger barriers to dating and establishing relationships.
And one barrier, I like how you mentioned barriers. One barrier also is fear of rejection, which again, it also blends with how dating and relationships it's difficult for anyone, but rejection is especially hard, because especially if you've had no experience. So a lot of my clients are afraid just to go up to a woman that they're going to be shot down. But I like to say, when they're rejected for the first time, I say, congratulations. You've now entered the dating world.
Right,
welcome.
Right.
Because you're going to be shot down a lot, because everyone's shot down.
Right.
And I like that because I like it because it normalizes the whole dating concept for someone with a disability.
I tell everyone up front, you have to inoculate yourself against rejection, that you have to, take a shot, because it happens to everybody and for all different reasons. So when you were talking about or asking the question, when should you reveal, and I take the same approach as Danielle, is like, okay, I definitely going to say, I have a disability up front, but I'm not going to do a complete data dump. But I also say, check your emotions, it's check in, not don't hold back your emotions, check in with your emotions. You don't want to fall head over heels in love with somebody only to reveal later and get rejected.
Right.
So, I would, if you're keeping it casual, and it's you reveal as needed. But if you feel like this relationship is getting closer, then start to reveal so you're not so invested emotionally and then get cut off, because I think once the rejection hurts more the more invested you are and the more strong feelings you have. So I like to get that stuff out of the way up front, and and as you get along.
Okay, I want to ask I'm sorry. I'm sorry to cut you, but I want to ask a question to make sure I get to it about assisting someone during sex. How awkward does that get for the person who's assisting?
Well, it all depends on the assistant. So I wrote an article for New Mobility many years ago called Facilitated Sex, the Next Frontier, with a question mark. So you asked about the assistant, but also sometimes someone being assisted. So this was both people I knew. The guy had muscular dystrophy and was in a power chair with limited movement, and the woman was quadriplegic. She was also pretty complete, and they wanted to be together. And I met them it was at Disney World, and her attendant was there. And we were on a boat, and I asked her attendant, how comfortable would you feel helping somebody with sexual activity? And she was, I think, from Dominican Republic or something. So, it's natural, no problem. So I let the woman know that your attendant would be willing to help if you guys want to be together. And so I worked with the three of them, and she actually, helped them position themselves and actually had to help him position himself for intercourse. So the attendant was comfortable, and he was comfortable, but she, there was another woman in the room, and the woman, there was this interracial couple, and the woman was the same race as the other guy, and the woman was attractive, right? Mm-hmm. So she was wondering, she felt, okay, there's a third person in the room, and, is he excited because of her, not me? And so there was, there were things going on with her having a third person in the room. So, and each situation is unique. If it's your regular caretaker and you have a comfortable relationship, and sometimes I work with two people with disabilities and their caretakers are there, they'll set them up and go out of the room, right? And it's, for them, it's part of the work. Sometimes people have to go outside of that regular care and find somebody who will help them. All this is like under, you don't see ads in the paper for this. All this happens.
I was about to ask how does that fit into the job description? Is that something like from an agency, a regular aid from a regular agency?
It's still a very gray, shady area because I mean, a lot of people, me included, look at sexuality as another ADL, activities of daily living. So you need to help in the shower or need help eating, and also sexuality, that's important too. But agencies and hiring a home attendant, it's difficult to add that into the picture for a lot of reasons, just because, I mean, one being that it's hard to find a good home attendant in the first place. Right. Period. Full stop. But then to ask them to take it to this next level. But in the years since I've been to New York, whenever I interview a new home attendant, I make it clear that I'm single, I'm dating, and that's going to be a part of it, the dating. But when it comes to actually having someone facilitate, it's hard. I have a client who is spastic with cerebral palsy, and she can't really do anything on her own and wants to masturbate. So it's like who to ask to help with that. And say, even if the home attendant says yes, it's hard to do that when someone's watching, or someone knows what you're doing, or someone's waiting on the other side of the door for you to finish. Right. It's hard.
It takes a lot of sexual esteem and a lot of
trial and error time to get used to.
Somebody who's very comfortable with their self and with sexuality. It's like these two things, like you say, because it doesn't matter if they're on the other side of the door. They're waiting. And so if you're not completely comfortable with that person, it might be, depending, you might be good with one person. when I help people, it's usually they're hiring people outside of agencies, because when you're working with institutions and you're working with, their legal guidelines, if I was hiring someone to help me, I needed help, with masturbation, with setting up or something, I would certainly include that in my ADLs. But when it comes to, helping in other times, I think sometimes it's an independent person who's more flexible.
Yeah, that's a good point. Each person's level of functionality is important. So maybe someone who's at my level of function or Mitch's, we can have the home attendant help us, but not really know she's helping us. For example, maybe set up in bed. I mean, you don't have to tell everything. Set up certain way and then have your privacy to do what you want to do sexually. But then clients who can't do that at all, or who have no motor movement, even fine motor movement. So it's really a case-by-case basis. And in my sessions, we brainstorm that a lot.
Okay. What is the most common thing that clients ask about? In
terms of dating and sexuality?
Yes.
The topics are, how do I meet someone? That might be number one.
Yeah.
How do I get past those stereotypes and meet someone good? So going back to your point, before latching on to someone maybe who's not all the, he's not that great,
right.
But
he's
it's
there.
Yeah. So how to get someone who's great and who meets your checklist of what you're looking for in a mate. So where to go? What do I say in my profile? How do I navigate the first date? Things like that. Or how do I masturbate? How do I masturbate when I can't have sex toys in the house? My mom will find them. Where do I go? And then sex in general, and also safety issues around sex. Like I really want to start hooking up. I'm meeting people on Tinder, but what if it's a stranger? How do I make sure I'm safe? So we'll brainstorm, having the home attendant sit in the other room or next door. And even we also, a topic is gynecological visits, because some people don't, have bad experiences with gynecologists if they're females in wheelchairs. Gynecologists who are like, I never
they don't
thought.
want to touch your liability.
Or they don't ask you anything about your sex life, assuming
as if
that
you don't have one.
Right. And if there is, yes. And if there is a problem down there, it's like, well, it's a small problem. The rest of that sentence, and you're not having sex anyway. So think of how damaging that is.
Right.
So those are just a fraction.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, with two other areas that I work with people. One is getting out of the friend zone, as I call it. So people who are successful in making friends and even going on dates, but when it comes to making that date into a sexual situation, after the first, second date, that's when it all falls apart. So, I work on folks, work with folks with that. I go over specifically what happened, and we do role playings about how it could happen differently. And a lot of it is about what we were talking about before. In the back of their heads, they're saying, all this is because I'm using a wheelchair. Everything else in my life is good. I've got a good degree. I got a good job. I got a good personality. But it's the wheelchair. And I said to one guy, I'm like, okay, and it happened like you said, with the data dump, telling somebody everything. He was on the bed with somebody, and he was putting his hand in her shirt, and she said, "Remind me why you're in a wheelchair again." And he just let out, "I was born with this. This is what I need." Blah blah blah. She got up, she cried, she walked out. And she came back and she said, "I'm sorry. Do you want to see me naked?" He said, "No," because at this point he's already just decimated. And I said to him, if I were in a bed with somebody and my hand were in her shirt, and she said, remind me why you're in a wheelchair, I would say, because I can't walk, silly, and my tongue would be in her mouth before the next word, and I wouldn't break my stride, because I'm not constantly concerned that they're not going to like me because I'm in my wheelchair, and then if I didn't do that and she came back and she said, "Do you want to see me naked?" I would say, "Of course, maybe we could pick up where we left off." So, when you have a certain amount of, confidence in your abilities and your dateability and your your ability to be, sexual, then you could do that. But if it's your first time and you haven't made that, and it's happened to you 3 times, you begin to say everything's about my chair. So once again, I have to give all examples of other people I know in their situation that have, successfully gotten out of the friend zone. And then I get approached by a lot of men it used to be more around 50, who've never had any sexual activity. They got injured early, teenagers or 20s, and lived with their folks, as you talked about, privacy issues, and never did that. And at this point in their lives, they're reaching out to find like a surrogate partner. So sometimes, I interview them, I let them know what to expect, what not to expect, and most of the time, the surrogate partner isn't what's needed. They need some dating skills and some confidence and coaching. Sometimes a surrogate partner is appropriate, but I'm getting younger and younger people. I had a guy that was still like 22, and I'm like, once again, what Danielle said, he had 2 professional parents, like a doctor and something else, and the mother especially totally wanted to discount the disability. Why can't you find somebody normally? And he totally wanted to make it about his disability. And I said, your mother is kind of right in one way. You haven't done anything to meet anybody and do this. And I said, you went to school the first time, you stayed at home. School is a good place to break out. You're doing X, Y, and Z. Why don't you go back for your master's and live at school, and get an attendant. You'll have your privacy, and you could reach out and start. I gave him some things to go both groups with people with disabilities and where to go to meet people in areas that he was interested, that would be a general population. And so when he did find somebody without a surrogate, and he had a great time, and it was somebody who was kind of a woman who was kind of a devotee, someone who was interested in disability, and that didn't bother him. It gets into a whole different area of dating, but he came back asking, like, is there a place where he could find more of these people? Well, if you were a woman, I could put you on a website, and they'll be all over you. But I don't know if there's anything for women who like men.
Okay. Dr. Tepper and Dr. Sheypuk, I want to say thank you very much for enlightening us, for joining us. I enjoyed the conversation very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Mitch Tepper and Dr. Danielle Sheypuk. You've been listening to Independence Radio, a program of New York City's Independence Care System. I'm your host, Stephanie Wallace. Thanks for listening.